Yasher Koach, Cantor. During this pandemic, you may have seen a flood of new podcasts on your iPhone or whatever mobile device you decide to listen to podcasts. And these podcasts have been of every topic you can imagine. And so over these past few months, I decided to get into the mix and create my own podcast. And this podcast was, I thought, pretty unique. It combined two passions of mine that usually on paper do not intersect. On the one hand, there was faith, and on the other hand, there was sports. So I called it Rabbi on the Sidelines, the intersection of faith and sports. And every single week now for the last 3 months, I've interviewed athletes and coaches and managers and fans, anybody that I can find within the world of sports, that when I ask them the simple question, is there faith in the world of sports? They give me an interesting answer. As a child and even as an adult, sports does something. I was blessed not just to play, not so well, but to follow. It can be basketball or baseball or tennis or golf or table tennis or hockey or field hockey. Whatever it is, I love to watch the action. It's the challenges of the athletes, it's the triumphs of the teams, it's the camaraderie that communities form over these sports. But I continue to ask myself, was there faith in these people that I was watching? And every week for the last 3 months, every Thursday at 10 o'clock when I go online, and I ask these people, is there faith in the world of sports? Every single one of them, unplanned, says, Rabbi, yes. And they stop talking about the sports world whatsoever, and they begin telling me their personal narratives of faith, both on the court, but really, to be honest, mostly off the court. And I watch as their mind continues to race and floods back to memory, as they tell me the stories of how their parents and their grandparents impacted what they do today. Rabbi on the Sidelines, I have a new title: The Stories That You Don't Hear on TV. And so several months ago, browsing social media, I found my next interviewee this Thursday. And if you know, this Thursday, April 8th, on the secular calendar, but it's Yom HaShoah. It's Holocaust Remembrance Day. And my next guest this coming Thursday, her name is Jory Epstein. She grew up in Dallas, went to Yavne Hebrew Academy, a Jewish day school. She followed her education at the University of Texas, became a broadcast journalism major, and she followed her love of sports. She worked for Sports Illustrated, and now she is one of the lead columnists for USA Today and the National Football League, following the Dallas Cowboys. But this Thursday, we're not going to talk about the season that was. And we're not going to talk about the season that will be with fans in the stands and that excitement. But we're going to talk about a project that she just completed. It's this right here. It's the new book called The Upstander: How Surviving the Holocaust Sparked Max Glaubin's Mission to Dismantle Hate, by Jory Epstein. You see, when Jory was 17 years old, she went on March of the Living. Right after Pesach, got on a plane to Poland, like so many of us have done here within Sinai Temple. And she not experienced, but learned. Learned, of course, the history of the Holocaust. But on that trip, Max Glaubin was the survivor that went along with her. Max also lives in Dallas and has gone on the March of the Living over 15 times. Max's story inspired Jory so much that when she was 17 years old, a decade ago, she said, Max, one day I will write your book. And 10 years later, Max's story is here to stay. In the foreword of the book, Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who we know so well from the American Jewish University, he writes, what do you do with the accident of your survival? What do you do with the accident of your survival? And Dr. Berenbaum explains that in America, it's all about looking forward. Don't go back to the camps and look at the past, but look towards tomorrow. And he explains that Max didn't do that. But rather, Max went according to his biblical ancestors who left Egypt. Every Friday night, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Remember that moment of the exodus of Egypt. Because with that memory, only then could we, the next generation, continue to live our lives. Jory concludes her book by telling us her thoughts after that March of the Living. She says, I quote, when I went on the March of the Living at 17 years old, I came out with far more many questions than I did answers. When I read that line, I think if you ask anybody that went on March of the Living or has been to Poland or experienced that trip through the Valley of the Shadow, they'll say the same thing. Many more questions than answers. But when I read that line on Pesach this past week, it reminded me of last week when we sat with our communities, whether virtually or in person, and we read of the four sons. And it reminded me not of the Chacham, the wise person, but rather the last child, the She'eino Yodea Lishol. The child who does not know how to ask those questions. The child who comes back from Poland and says, I don't know what to do with this. So what do? You see, it could be good to ask no questions. Listen to the facts and that it's it. But we all know it's not so good to not ask questions. Asking questions is how we become curious. And becoming curious leads to more wisdom. So what is the answer that the Haggadah gives us? To the child that does not know how to ask a question, the Haggadah tells us, At patach lo. 3 words. At patach lo. Open you. You open yourselves up. Now, if you know anything about Hebrew grammar, the word at meaning you, it should be atad, talking to a son. At is for a daughter. Now, the rabbis didn't make a grammatical mistake in the Haggadah. There were plenty of editors for that. And so Baruch Epstein, Rabbi Baruch Epstein, the author of the Torah Tamima, he says there must be a greater message in that word at. You open yourselves up. That word at is spelled Aleph, Taf. Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and Taf, the last. So how do you open yourself up? Rabbi Baruch Epstein teaches us. You need to begin with Aleph. But you're not done until you get to Taf. Yes, you can open yourself up. But the Haggadah continues, V'higarata levincha bayom hahu. In order to open up yourself, they quote the book of Exodus. V'higarata levincha. Tell that story to your children on this day. That child who doesn't know how to ask any questions, it's our job. It's our job to invoke memory by telling a story, by starting at the beginning. Not by saying our story starts here last week at the Seder table, but explaining how we got to the Seder table. In just a moment, we're going to conclude Pesach with the Yizkor service. Yizkor means to remember. You know, when I lit the Yortzeit candle last night for my loved ones, it was an interesting moment because we have not recited Yizkor since Shmini Atzeret, since the fall. And I was thinking of all the times from that moment of the last time you lit the Yizkor candle until now. All the times that we have to do it ourselves, that we have to open up ourselves in order to invoke memory. It doesn't come naturally. But thankfully, our tradition gives us moments like these. Gives us moments to start at Aleph and go through Taf. We did 15 steps of the Seders. We repeated them twice. We went Aleph through Taf. And as we sat at those Seder tables, we looked also at empty chairs. Chairs of people who we wished we can hug still, who we wish we can hear their voice, who we wish that even today we can ask them those questions to become wiser, to become more knowledgeable, and to become more loving. For when we sit at that Seder table and we look at those empty chairs, we don't only look, but we open their books as well. There's a beautiful Haggadah, if you've never seen it, by Noam Sion. And when you get to the 4 children, instead of text, there are pictures. And there's one picture of 4 books. One book is on fire. You think it's the evil child, the Rasha, but rather it can be the Chacham, the wise child. But this year I looked at those pictures of those books. And there's one book that is completely closed, but is full of pages. And after reading this book by Jory Epstein, the Upstander, I began to think of memory a little different. There's many books that are written. There are many books that we have not read yet. But I thought about the words of the Haggadah. At petach lo. Open. Open the book. Read the words of those who came before us. Read the words, read the stories of those we love so much. Because only when we read those books will we have the ability to tell our loved ones, these were the people that got us here. These were the people that took us out of Egypt. And yes, God willing, we are the people that will open up the next generation to continue to tell our stories on this Yizkor day. We take our Sidurim on page 330. Page 330, the Yizkor reading of We Recall. Some of us recall parents who gave us life, who cared for us and nurtured us, and who taught us to take our first steps on our own. Some of us remember a wife, a husband, a partner, our friend and lover with whom we shared so much of our lives. Our failures and achievements, joys and sorrows, intimate secrets. Some of us recall brothers and sisters who matured together with us, sometimes competing with us, sometimes encouraging us on, bound to us by a lifelong relationship. Some of us remember children, entrusted to us too briefly, to whom we gave our loving care and from where we received a trust that has enriched our lives. Their memory is always with us. Many of us recall relatives who knew us, teachers who affected us, and beloved friends who walked beside us in life, guiding us, listening to us, supporting us. Our lives are shaped by those who were alongside us as we walked on our path. May our inheritance impel us to strive to live lives of holiness and service. May memories of love inspire us to love. May painful memories impel us to mitigate the pain others experience. And may we be grateful the strength to affirm life's meaning, even in the face of death. Page 331, the cantor leads us, Shiviti.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid ki mimini bal emot lachein samach libi vayagel kevodi af besar